All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the Let Me Introduce You podcast. I am Jen. This is Adarian. We are covering hip hinging today.
Yeah.
And this is a good topic for Adarian. He's very passionate about this. But before we get into this, what is a hip hinge? I feel like it's important to define something before we talk about it, right?
Yeah. So what's hip hinge?
I found a definition in a research paper. It's a lower body movement that prioritizes eccentric hip flexion and concentric hip extension.
What does that mean? What's wrong with people? What is? Wait, say that again.
It's a lower body movement that prioritizes eccentric hip flexion and concentric hip extension.
Ooh, they make this hard.
They do.
They make it hard. So, I mean, to me, hip hinge is basically I'm not going to let my knee flex as my torso goes forward or backwards.
Although, wouldn't you consider like a deadlift a hip hinge?
No, RDL is more of a hip hinge to me than a deadlift. You know, people.
Okay.
Look, it's one of those funny things. Where like I said, people get deadlift and squats, combined.
Yes.
But the funny thing about it is this here. It depends on how you want to stand up.
Right.
Do you want to stand up with your legs or do you want to stand up with your lower back?
Yes. Which this is why it shouldn't be surprising. A 2020 systematic meta-analysis found that deadlifts were actually recruited more low back musculature than hamstring musculature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it this way here. And it's funny how people, that's why they have these funny words about, because there's a word called straight leg deadlift.
Right.
And a straight leg deadlift is you're not supposed to bend your legs at all. But once again, right. Who's going to bend over like that and try to, it's weird. People have these weird things, where you can't do this or can't do that, and they probably too got confused as people try to do RDLs, versus a deadlift, where, the starting positions are different.
Yes.
The starting position RDL is totally different. The starting position, they're different.
Right.
But what are people trying to feel? My hamstrings. Okay. But once again, who's that? That's a bodybuilder issue.
Yes.
I'm trying to use this to target a certain, that's a bodybuilder issue. That's not, So we talk about how bodybuilders are really great at doing something like isolating muscles.
Yes.
Just like do a preacher curl, which is really great at isolating what? Taking the shoulders out. Because you think about this. Most people that do bicep curls have big shoulders. Why? Because the shoulders doing the work.
Yeah.
So if you want to take the shoulders out of the equation, do what? Do a preacher curl and prop your arms up, and then they're great at stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but now we into this thing between, like you say, you have a lot of people teaching hip hinge as you need to learn how to hip hinge. No, you don't.
So it's interesting. I actually went on a search. I was like, where did deadlifting come from? Like, where did we get this idea that hip hinging is such an important thing?
Yeah.
And the term deadlift literally comes from to lift a dead weight off the floor.
Right.
And the very first reference to this is there's a huge stone that archaeologists unearthed, I don't know when, in the last century. And on it, it says some ancient Grecian picked this stone up.
Right.
So it was a feat of strength. To be able to deadlift was a feat of strength.
Yeah. Because you had to go back to the days of maybe you had to do that.
Right.
I'm moving rocks. So I got to be able to deadlift this rock up off the ground, or whatever, this boulder off the ground. I'm going to hook around this boulder or this log. I'm going to hook around this log and lift it off the ground, and get it up. But yeah, it's one of those things that somebody added rules or something. They shouldn't have rules.
And people have added a lot of rules to hip hinging. There's lots of ways you should be able to hip hinge, right?
Yeah.
And I'm unclear as to why. Like, what benefit does hip hinging give us?
It like I said, if you're trying to work on your hamstrings, but once again, you have to understand the structure. So let's go with the structure. You have this hamstring that isn't biarticular. It
Right.
runs. It runs from here, you know, the side of the tibia,
Yeah.
to the ischial tuberosity spot.
Yes.
Okay. So now it's a direct connection. So how do I make this thing loose? Well, I have to move one of these towards each other.
Right.
And so in one of those situations, like if you're in a squat where legs are running, you know, parallel to the ground, at that point in time, the hamstring is loose. Because why? Because those two things are close now.
That makes sense.
And so, but as you stand up, you got the tibia staying here, and now the hamstring is basically moving away. It tightens up.
Right.
So now, being that it's tight, you can't move. So what am I going to do? I'm going to hip hinge.
Yeah.
As I hip hinge, it puts more stress on this hamstring, because now the hamstring is actually trying to stop you from rotating forward.
Which is why people feel it in their hamstrings, despite the fact that, again, if you look at like an EMG, there's a lot of work that's actually being done in the erector spinae and the quadriceps, it turns out.
Yeah. And so if you look at that whole situation, you know, it's like people want to touch their toes.
Right.
You know, you can only go so far as the hamstrings let you go.
Yep.
You can only go so far as the ham. So in a sense, hip hinge is kind of the same thing. You can use weight to drag you down to the ground.
Right.
But, you know, when are you ever gonna, and think about this, and people say, you know, in the industry, what they tell you, don't lift with your back. Now they teach you how to lift with your back.
Which I think is so funny. And it makes sense from a lever's perspective that when you're hinged over, right, where the load is, where the resistance is, and where the effort is, that the low back is what's going to pick you back up.
Right. But what do? They don't have the weights hanging out from underneath them. The weights come back towards the body because they swing back towards the body. So that changes the whole lever. That makes it an easy lever now.
Right.
You know, if you put that weight out there from, because the weight, because like I said, it's closer to the fulcrum, easier to lift. You put the weight out far away from the fulcrum on something like that, oh, it's going to be hard to lift.
It's not going to feel very good.
No, it's not going to feel very good. You know? And a lot of times with weightlifting, what they tell you to do, keep the bar close to you. There's a reason they want to keep the bar close to you. It's easier.
Yes. Well,
You
as
know?
I said, there's a lot of rules with hip hinging. So many. Keep the weight towards you. You're supposed to really get your hips to shift back, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're deadlifting, you add in all kinds of other stuff, like engage your lats by pulling the bar apart or whatever cue you want to. Yeah.
Yeah. So this becomes the thing, you know. I want to move, and this way these patterns get crossed over into moving stuff, you know.
Right.
So now I want to move, and as I walk, what am I going to do? I'm hip hinge.
Mm-hmm.
Because my legs gonna lock out, my torso gonna lean forward, and I'm basically gonna pull myself forward. So I'm hip hinging as I walk. You know, now I wonder why I have hamstring problems.
Right.
You know, when I should have squatted. And that's the biggest thing is people don't want to squat. I don't know why people don't want to squat.
Yeah.
But if you squat and not squat this way, but if you actually sit back on your glutes, it turns off the hamstrings, which makes it easier to move now.
Right.
And it's a weird thing. Like, don't we want to move easier? Why are we trying to make this hard? You know, why is one thing about lifting weights got transferred to everything else?
Which does seem to be a theme in the, I guess, strength and conditioning world. I'll just call it that. That this idea that if we do this thing in the weight room, it's going to suddenly translate to everything else.
Everything else. It not suddenly, but it must translate to everything else. When
in reality, what it translates is to being able to just do that weightlifting task really well.
Yeah, that task really well. Yeah. So, but even like people like, what's the one thing people like to do? Like when people do that single leg exercise, like they have the weight in one hand and they basically hip hinge.
So like a single leg RDL, basically.
Something like that. Yeah. And I'm picking up. You know how hard it is on the hamstring? You can feel it pulling right at the connection point. Like, this is not a good thing. This is a lot of stress on this one point right now, you know. But what do? We learn to override these pain things. We override all these things. We learn to override because somebody said this is good for us. When you go, no, just squat.
Right.
Just go ahead and squat. You know, squat to pick this thing up. Squat to do this. Squat to do that. squat to move. I mean, even like I said, I still think the biggest thing that people do, and is we learn to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
I know people can't see this at home, but I got to do a quick demo. Let me do a quick demo because we're having a conversation, so it'll translate. So I mean, if I'm here and I'm supposed to, if I go here, push back, see now what? Because who's trying to move? The tibia is trying to move back. It can't move. See, they're locked. The tibia is back as far as it can go. This can't go. So that becomes the whole thing. And that's all you're trying to do really in a hip hinge exercise is if you don't lock out the tibia, that's the whole thing. But people don't want to do it this way. If I keep the tibia right here and don't let the tibia come back, if I keep the tibia right here, then guess what it becomes? It becomes a glute exercise.
Yes.
If I let the tibia lock out, then it becomes a hamstring exercise. That's why I tell you to push it back. They want you to push it back because they want the tibia. Because what's happening is this goes back and pulls the tibia into place. Now you're jammed, like I said, you're jammed up. And so they don't want to go here because now we're basically going, I'm into a squat position. So that one instruction of push back locks out the tibia, which locks out the hamstring.
Which, again, if we're looking at this like from I'm using quotes here, a functional perspective, right? And if the goal is to be able to lift things off the floor, right, you're going to end up using this combination of what's basically a squat and a hip hinge. Like you end up using kind of both in order to get down there to get the object. Right,
because you're going to squat so far, you're going to hinge the rest of the way.
Right.
But like I said, then they're trying to target a specific muscle, the hamstring. Like I said, you got to lock the tibia out. Right. And so how do you do that? Push your hips back as far as possible. And like what do we know? That ischial tuberosity moves backwards, which does what? Pull on the tibia because it's connected to the hamstring and they're connected. Pulls it back, locked out. Now, hamstrings.
Which also begs the question, why is it necessary to target a specific muscle? Because again, in athletic performance or anything, even just general movement, like if you're just trying to, become more fit or whatever, all of the muscles are going to be working together. Right.
Well, once again, we get to the situation where people struggle to hip hinge. And you don't struggle to hip hinge if you understand it. This is the whole thing. And we've been talking about this. If people understand the structure, all this stuff is easy.
Yep.
Because all you're trying to do, like I said, if you want a hip hinge, you need to lock out the tibia, which locks out the hamstring. Easy.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do anything else. Hey, if you just straighten out your legs and lock out, you're gonna hip hinge. I mean, yeah. It's that simple that if I just do this one thing here, where if I just keep my legs locked out, see?
Yeah.
It's automatic. I'm going to hip hinge. If I lock my hips back, I'm going to hinge because I got to lock out the tibia. That's all it is. If tibia goes there, guess what? You go to but that's what.
And by tibia going there, for those of you that can't see, he's letting his knees push forward. So the tibia is pitching forward as well.
So yeah, and if tibia, but once again, if you understand the basic structure of how we do things, it's easy. If you don't, we get complicated. Even think about this way here. If the tibia moves, say the tibia moves forward, who comes with it? The gastroc. So what does the gastroc do? It pulls the femur forward. It just basically unlocks the system. Right. So that's why as the tibia moves, as it moves backwards, what does it do? It pushes on the gastroc. What does the gastroc do? It pulls the femur into place. So basically, I'm just locking this joint. I'm just gonna unlock this joint. If the joint locks, hip hinge, unlock, squat. Which
also forces one to ask, like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to inhibit movement? Which is what's going to happen when you lock things into place. You're going to be putting the brakes on, right?
Right.
Or are you trying to facilitate movement? So if the goal is to actually move, then it's important to kind of consider what you're doing too, don't you think?
Well, yes, it's that, but at the same time, think about this here. When is the best time to hip hinge? When you're about to fall over the edge of a cliff.
I was just thinking that.
If you're trying to hold yourself back.
Yep.
So that's we've seen that position where somebody gets to the edge of something, about to tip over. What happens? Lock out, and then you hinge and and then you wave your arms.
Right.
You know, great time to hip hinge. So it's not that you don't know how to hip hinge. It's just an emergency type situation. I don't want to tip over, so I'm a hinge. Oops.
Now, do you think from like a muscular development standpoint or like a getting stronger standpoint that practicing hip hinging is necessary?
No, I think you're dulling the senses. I mean, you got to remember, we have these safety mechanisms built into the body. People like to override.
Right.
You know, if I poke you in the same spot over and over and over again, pretty soon you're going to ignore it.
Yeah.
So your hamstrings are vibrating. They tell you they're tight.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm just gonna keep on pulling on you. It's gonna keep on pulling on you. It's gonna keep on pulling on you. You know, until finally what? You don't complain anymore.
Right.
So you're not any stronger. You just overrode a signal. You know, and because the hamstring is holding you up, it's not doing the work to raise you back up. That's another part of by another system. You know, like I said, that's back extension at that point in time.
Yes.
And we people like it's funny when you look at a person's back. If they got, you can see like ones with really strong erectors. They've been using them, You know, so it's not even the hamstring that's doing the work. It's something else is doing the work to stand you up.
Right.
You know, so even from that perspective there, you know, because you look at the structure and you go, okay, you know, people always want to talk about hamstring strength, all that kind of stuff, making the hamstring stronger. But look at, what is the hamstring really for? It's to help you stand up. It locks the tibia into place.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I mean, because think if you were crawling, what would your hamstring do? If you were crawling, what would your hamstring do? Nothing.
I get. Well, now the hamstring provides stability.
Yeah, why does it provide stability?
So that you don't fall over.
Because it's holding what in place?
The tibia.
The tibia.
So essentially what you're saying is the hamstring is an anchor.
I wouldn't call it, I would say anchor, but I would say more of it's the linchpin of locking out at the knee joint.
Okay.
Because of, you think drawbridge. Think drawbridge.
Right.
Where the knee, just think about the knee as being a drawbridge.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have what? I got to need a way to lower the drawbridge and raise the drawbridge. The hamstring is the linchpin to all that.
And you're talking like specifically in closed chain though, right? Because in open chain, the hamstring does something a little bit different.
Well, open chain depends on what you're doing, you know, because once again, that you got to look at the connection point.
Yeah.
And so it's doesn't go where people think it goes. Just like it's not biarticular. It doesn't cross two joints. It's behind a joint, but it doesn't cross that next joint.
Right.
So if you look at it from it's not being biarticular, it's a different story again.
Mm-hmm.
That's like people will lay on their stomach and say, I'm doing a hamstring curl. No, that's a calf.
Right.
If you want to do something with the hamstring, the hips have to raise up.
Yeah.
You know, so at that point in time, you know, if you're sitting, you know, what are the hips doing? Because remember, the hip, ischial tuberosity, runs a straight line to the side of the knee. Yeah. So at that point in time, you go, okay, what is this really doing? Even think about this here. Think about this here. The short head of the bicep femoris goes where? To the femur.
To the femur.
Yeah. It's the only thing touched. And why is it there? It keeps the hamstring tension right. Other than that thing as you try to move, the tension would get jacked up on it. So it maintains tension as you try to move. It's the only, like I said, other than that, there is no bone for the hamstring. It's a straight line rope.
Which is unusual when you start looking at the attachment points of the different muscles in the leg, you see a lot of things that are running not linearly. They run all these different directions.
Right. So when it's time to hinge, and that's the other part, when it's time to hinge, you know, what's the femur doing? You know?
It's staying still, isn't it?
For the most part, yes, and for the most part, no. You know, because who's moving? The bottom of the femur has to move to lock out too.
Right.
So it's giving you slack into the system. So what slack do you finally take up? You finally took the slack of the bicep, the short hair of the bicep femoris. That's you finally took up the slack in that.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at this, once again, who am I training? I got 3 of these muscles, and 4 technically if you count the short head. 4. Right. I got 3 of these muscles. 2 go to this side, 1 go. It's a weird thing, and who's working right now? But if you look at hip hinging and what it does, it essentially forces you to lock out at the knee joint, and that makes the hamstring tight like a rope. Mm-hmm. Taut is like people say, instead of tight, say taut.
Yeah.
And now I can do what? I'm basically slowly lowering myself. See, it's like you basically lowering yourself with a rope.
Right. You're putting again. You're it's more of a braking. It's a braking mechanism versus a let's speed this up mechanism.
Right. And so now, what's the safety? What the thing about it? It's the safety mechanism that's built in. Technically, if you tilt too far, it releases the tibia. That's what should happen. If you hinge too far, and that's why I think people are trying to do. If you hinge too far, the knees, if you hinge too far, the tibia wants to drop out.
Right.
You force yourself to hold it because it wants to drop out. It's a safety mechanism. So that tells you if you hinge too far and these drop out, we probably shouldn't be hinging.
I know you've said before that some people are basically, they have more of a squat pattern to how they do things, and some people have more of a hinge pattern to how they do things, right?
Yeah. So, well, it also depends on up leg, down leg. But the biggest thing is think about let's go here. Somebody that knees lock out fast.
Yeah.
Probably has a short hamstring. Mm-hmm. Because like I said, you probably have short hamstrings, and then when you stand up, what happens? It pops that tibia into place. I mean, you got to just think about this one way. I got 2 columns. I got the tibia and I got the femur. Yeah. And the only thing holding those things, because remember, the only thing holding those in place is the structure of the hamstring and the gastroc.
Right.
That's the only thing that holds those 2 things and keep them from buckling out. So you go, okay, let's look at it from that standpoint there. So what happens if I have a relatively short hamstring? What happens if I have a relatively long hamstring? What happens if I have a relatively short gastroc or a long gastroc? That changes how people will move about.
Right.
So the biggest thing is being that, like I said, there's a reflex built into the hamstrings. If you lean too far, they buckle. Yeah. Which is, once again, if you think about this, if you're about to fall over the edge of the cliff, rotation, you need a rotational component. I know people like this, but if I'm leaning at the edge of the cliff here, what's the next best thing? Here.
To bend and so Adarian bent his knees instead of pitching over the deck.
That's the next best thing. It's a safety mechanism.
Right.
And far too many times we do what in our body? We override safety mechanisms. We have a whole lot of them. We continue to just want to override them for the sake of what? To lift a weight that you don't need to be lifted.
Well, and it is a curious thing. I've done tasks with people where I put just a variety of objects on the floor, weighted objects, and I just say, will you pick that up and will you move it across the room? And nobody ever uses a strict deadlift pattern to pick up the object. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna be in between these 2 things because of sequence of movement and everything. But to strictly wipe out the deadlift pattern and just say we're gonna hinge, you go, when you need both of them, and far too often, like I said, for the sake of whatever, we wipe out something when we actually need both of them. We don't understand the structure and how things work. Like I said, if people would be surprised to understand that the hamstring greatest job is to pull a tibia into position so you can stand up and not fall.
Right.
That's the greatest job.
Now, how does that, if that's its greatest job, how does that relate back to the hamstring strain episode that we did 2 episodes ago?
Well, it's the same thing where once again, you're in a situation where, the knees can't buckle to relieve the strain.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the tibia's in place, you're too far out there, knee can't buckle, boom, hamstring strain. So that's that thing is that we have the safety mechanism that can't happen at that point in time. It doesn't at that point in time. Boom, hamstring becomes the issue.
Right. Which
Especially
is related to
rate.
Which is, I'm sorry, what was that?
Especially when you talk about things moving at that rapid of a rate.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, because like I said, if the knee bends, you won't pull a hamstring. There's no way. It's too loose. It's too loose to pull. There's no way it's loose.
That does make sense, actually.
If knees bent, you won't pull a hamstring. It's just, So even if your foot's on the ground, you try to yank it back. It's so much slack in it, it won't. But straighten out your leg and catch your heel, and then all of a sudden you go, uh-oh. But if you do that, well, what happens? The knee wants to bend again. It's amazing how many times we put in a situation the knee wants to bend, and we don't want it to bend.
Right.
So I think, like I said, once again, to me, hinge is a safety mechanism that comes in at play at this time in natural movement patterns. I think that, once again, if you hinge too far, the knees will buckle to relieve you of that, and then at the same time, our natural pattern is to squat. But people don't want to do what? People want to stand up.
Right.
So that's just like, even, when we talk about just general movement patterns, where I can walk and I'm walking with my hamstrings because I won't let the knee bend. So I'm just gonna, pull myself forward. I'm just gonna pull myself forward with my hamstrings. Because things work in reverse. If you pull something, it doesn't move, you move. Like I said, pull something backwards, it doesn't move backwards, you move forward. It's kind of the same thing with plantar flex. Why is the heel raised off the ground? The heel raises off the ground because why? Because the ground's not going to move. As you try to plantar flex, ground doesn't move, you move up.
Right.
So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. That was very informative, as always.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I mean, like I said, it's funny. Actually, it's funny. Like, I think people should try that. Go ahead and do RDL. Let your knees bend at the end. When you feel tight hamstring, let your knees bend. I bet they get a better action. I bet everything's gonna be better from that than forcing yourself to stand up with your back and keeping the hamstrings tight.
I like that, actually. And is that one of the reasons sumo deadlifts are actually a little more effective at loading kind of the musculature of the leg?
Well, yeah. Well, the biggest thing is, they're not required to have the hamstrings. That's just at that point in time, you just jammed up.
Yeah.
And so you may get this little movement at the knee, a little movement at the knee, but you're wide and things like that.
Yeah.
But that becomes more of a gastric issue than a hamstring issue.
Got it. Okay.
And then the glutes are really doing a lot of work to help you out. But yeah.
Yes.
But once again, like I said, weightlifting, movement, 2 different issues.
Yeah.
Because even with a sumo, I'm not going to walk that way. I'm not going to run that way. I'm not going to. So we talk about this, this walking, this walking movement versus weightlifting movement, or this running movement versus weightlifting movement.
Right.
They're in different ballparks.
That makes sense.
So.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Next week, Adarian doesn't know this, but we're doing shin splints.
Oh, you trying to do me now?
Oh, I totally am.
Hey, but you let the cat in the bag. I know now.
I totally did. Now you know. So you can start thinking about it.
Yeah, shin splints, easy.
And if anyone has any comments or any feedback or any topic they would like us to cover, feel free to just drop it in the comment section. All right.
And you can't see
Thank
some of the things I did, but just imagine some of these things. You know, like I said, imagine the knee at the knee being like a drawbridge where I'm gonna raise it and lower it to and imagine that.
That's a good visualization to end on. I like that. All right. Thanks, everybody.